Welcome to Plodcast, episode 77. Great to have you. Thanks for listening in. So for our topic, our subject this go-round, I want to talk a little bit about what I think is happening on the national scene. I don't want to credit this to the president as an example of him playing chess in the 17th dimension. I don't know that this is something that he's doing or not, but it's and I'm not prepared to affirm that at all. But I do believe that it's happening, and I do believe that it's involves the president very much. And I think we're going through a process of national creative disruption. National creative disruption. Sometimes good things come out of very real disasters. And by every objective measure, the disaster is not something you would have volunteered for, but something very, very good came out of it. So here's an example. When the Japanese attacked us at Pearl Harbor, as it happened, our battleships were in port and our aircraft carriers were at sea. And because of this, because we sustained such heavy losses with our battleships, that affected the strategy that was undertaken by our admirals for the next war. But admirals are like generals. They like to fight the last war. They like to utilize the technology or the weaponry that they have, that they're accustomed to, and so on. And if the times have shifted under your feet, sometimes you go out there and to fight the last war and you discover that what you're doing isn't anywhere near good enough. And because our battleships being the previous apex predator in the previous wars, were diminished or taken out, our strategy shifted to aircraft carriers. Well, that was a necessary move, and it's the kind of necessary move that we might not have taken had something different happened at Pearl Harbor. Imagine a company that is about to go, it's going to go belly up in 5 years. It's going to be swallowed up by all its competitors in 5 years because they're so set in their ways and they won't adjust anything. And you might think, about the only thing that's going to save this company is if the bubonic plague sweeps through headquarters and takes out all the senior management, and then you have to appoint some new people, and the new people are idiots, but they're going to make mistakes, but they're not going to make the old mistakes. They're not going to make the mistakes that would put the company under. Well, I think that something like that is happening on our national scene. What's happening is all the old rules for how you get along, how you get taken out, how you are managed, how you are stage managed. None of those things work on Donald Trump, and this does not make Donald Trump a fine fellow. This does not mean that I want him to be made our Sunday school superintendent. It just means that for whatever reason, he's got an immunity to some of the toxins that are used to poison all the previous czars. All the previous rulers can be taken out with these poisons, and for some reason he's immune, and it just doesn't work on him. And that has thrown Washington, D.C. into a state of consternation. And everything is having to be revisited. Everything is having to be overlooked. And if someone says this creative destruction, that means I'm not denying the destructive part. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, they sank our battleships. That's not a good thing. So this is not denying the destructive part. But we have to remember that people are agents, and when destructive things happen, there are opportunities created for people you didn't anticipate coming along and taking advantage of those new opportunities, which opportunities would not have been there had this disruption not happened. So when I'm looking at the current administration and I'm looking at what's currently going on, there are things that I'm very happy about. I'm very happy about the steady drumbeat appointment of conservative judges. And that's sort of an old school, that's not a creative disruption thing at all. That's just a good thing as measured by the old calculus. But there are other things, like the relationship between the president and the press, the president and the media, the relationship between the president and the deep state or the intelligence agencies. That's where the creative disruption is occurring, and I think it's really disruptive. I think it's really destructive, and I think it's really, really good. Here we are, Plodcast episode 77. Here's my book review. I just recently turned in a manuscript to Canon Press for a commentary on the Book of Revelation, and which is a great deal of fun to do. As part of the flyleaf in the front, I commented. G.K. Chesterton said that St. John the Divine saw many strange monsters in his vision, but none so strange as any one of his own commentators. Ambrose Bierce in the Devil's Dictionary said the Apocalypse, the Revelation, is a book in which St. John concealed all that he knew. The revealing is done by the commentators, he said, who know nothing. So the book of Revelation is famously obscure, right? It's famously difficult. We're not used to the apocalyptic style of writing. We're not accustomed to that genre. What do we do with it? And there are so many competing interpretations, so many competing understandings and whatnot. So I'm a postmillennialist. Meaning that I believe that the gospel is going to be victorious over time in history, and the world will be Christianized. I'm also a preterist, which means that for the bulk of the book of Revelation, I believe that all but the last couple of chapters, basically, were fulfilled prior to 70 A.D. In the first century. So I believe that the book of Revelation was not written later, not written in the 90s, but was written prior to 70 A.D. And I believe that it's talking about basically the replacement of the old Jerusalem, the harlot, with the new Jerusalem, who's coming down out of heaven, arrayed as a bride for her husband. So I'm a postmillennialist. I'm a preterist. That's my basic outlook. And as I've studied this subject over the years, I've read many books and worked through many books on this topic. I've probably learned the most about eschatology from Ken Gentry. He Shall Have Dominion, and some of his book on Before Jerusalem Fell, on the dating of Revelation. And Ken Gentry has got a commentary on Revelation that's not out yet. I wish it had been. If it had been, I certainly would have used it as I was doing my work on the Book of Revelation. But I'm here to. So I've read a bunch of books on this topic and so on. But the book I wanted to review for you is the book I found most helpful as I was doing my work on the Book of Revelation. Incidentally, my commentary is going to be called "The Sound of Many Waters." The Sound of Many Waters. But the book I found the most helpful is edited by a gent named Steve Gregg, and the name of his book is Revelation: Four Views. And this book is just simply a magnificent book. There are four basic takes on the book of Revelation. There are four basic interpretive schools. Now, if you wanted to parse them out, you could probably come up with 104 different takes on the book of Revelation. But there are four, in painting with a broad brush, there are four basic schools of thought on how the book of Revelation should be handled. They are the historicist position, the preterist position, the futurist position, and the spiritualist position. Let me just define those and then describe this book for you. The historicist position is the view that says the book of Revelation is a prophecy of the unfolding of all of church history. So view the book of Revelation as being given in the first century, and all of church history is rolled up at your feet like a carpet. And then you unroll the carpet down through history. And in this part of Revelation, you can see the rise of the papacy, and in this part of Revelation, you can see the Reformation. In the book of Revelation, you can see the Reformation, and so on. So a historicist is someone who thinks that the book of Revelation is predicting in a sustained, contiguous way all of church history. That's the historicist view. Almost no one today. This was probably the received approach among the reformers, but almost no scholar of any rank today holds to it. But there's still vestiges of this view. Some of a number of historicist books are still in print, and there's a vestige of this view among dispensationalists, where they take the 7 churches at the beginning of the book, and each one of those churches represents a church age. There's the age of Philadelphia, the age of Laodicea, and the age of Smyrna, and so on. That's a historicist cubbyhole within a futurist framework. So historicism basically thinks that Revelation predicts all of church history in a sustained way. The preterist view, and this is the view I hold, the preterist view, and it comes from the Latin word for past. The preterist believes that the book of Revelation was predicting the future at when the revelation was given, but it was John's future and it's our distant past. So let's say the book of Revelation is given to John in the 60s AD, and he's predicting the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. That's 10 years in his future and 2,000 years in our past. So preterists look for fulfillments in the first century. So they think it's predictive prophecy in the future from the time of the prophecy, but in our distant past. So the 5 heads, the beast with 7 heads. The 7 heads are 7 hills, which would be the cities, the hills of Rome. And there are also 7 kings. 5 were, 1 is. Well, Caesar Augustus, Julius Caesar, Caesar Augustus, down to the 6th, who is Nero. And so the preterist identifies these fulfillments in the first century. The futurist is someone who believes that John was predicting something in his distant future and in our probably imminent future. So the futurist holds that the book of Revelation is not yet fulfilled. The book of Revelation is yet to be fulfilled. So that's historicist, all of church history in a continuous way. Preterist, the history of the church and Israel and Rome in the first century. The futurist position is that it's a prediction of what's going to come to pass at the end of the world, still in our future. And then the 4th school of thought is the spiritualist, sometimes called the idealist, the spiritualist view. And take this view as the view that says it doesn't have any literal earthly fulfillment, but take it as a giant parable in the sky. So this is a gaudy and flamboyant and highly colored parable that describes the conflict of good and evil, the way the bad guys persecute the church, etc. So it's more parabolic than it is predictive prophecy. So those are the 4 views: historicist, preterist, futurist, and spiritualist. Now, what this book does, and this was in my view, a magnificent achievement. What Steve Gregg did was he takes a passage, he just works through the book of Revelation, passage by passage, just a few verses at a time. He'll take a section, let's say 10 verses, quotes that passage, and then in 4 parallel columns, he cites multiple commentators from each one of those 4 schools of thought. So going from left to right, historicist, and then preterist, and then futurist, and then spiritualist, and you read in 4 columns all the different things that all these different commentators have said about this passage that you just read. I'm a preterist, and I'm a convinced preterist, and I'm a postmillennialist. And if I step back and look at the futurist or the spiritualist or the historicist thing, looking at them from 50 yards, let's be honest, between us girls, I think those other views are crazy. But reading through all of the comments that these different commentators from all these different schools made about the text, I won't say I was as frequently blessed by observations made by adherents to these other schools. Blessed, learn something. Oh, that's really in the text. That's really good. I won't say that I was as blessed by the other schools of thought as I was by the one that lined up with what I thought, but I will say almost. I was frequently taught, frequently instructed, frequently blessed by futurists and by historicists and by spiritualists. There were a lot of good things in this book. So if you want to be firmly settled in your views on the book of Revelation, and you want to do it in a way that really does justice and gives the other schools of thought a genuinely fair shake, I can't recommend any book higher than this particular book, Revelation, 4 Views, edited by Steve Gregg. So we come now to our hamartiology section, Plodcast episode 77, and the word is Andrapodistes, and this is rendered as man-stealer by the King James Version. Its one occurrence is in 1 Timothy 1:10, and it's clustered in with a number of other sins. It would, of course, have reference to kidnapping. If someone's a man-stealer, then they're a kidnapper, whether for ransom or any other purpose. Kidnapping someone to sell him was a grievous sin and a crime in the Old Testament, and kidnapping someone for sale as a slave, kidnapping an Israelite for sale as a slave, even carried the death penalty with it, Exodus 21:16. So man-stealing was a big deal, Old Testament and New Testament. And this word would also, therefore, include anyone operating at the headwaters of a slave trade. So the New Testament talks about how you deal with someone who's been a slave for generations. If you're the great-great-grandson of a slave and you were born into slavery and you become a Christian, Colossians and Ephesians and 1 Timothy tell you how to behave as a slave, and you subvert the institution. There you subvert the institution of slavery by honest, conscientious, dutiful work. But the fact remains that the slave trade is an iniquitous practice and cannot be sustained apart from iniquity at the font. Iniquity at the you can't have slaves to sell unless somebody captured them, unless somebody took them, unless someone kidnapped them. And it's utterly contrary to sound doctrine.
You've spent a pleasant half hour with Plodcast proprietor Douglas Wilson. This podcast is produced by Canon Press. Please take a moment to subscribe to the Plodcast on your favorite listening platform. To hear more from Doug, please visit canonpress.com.